when Congress said, here, this is what an F1 student is, they were very explicit. This person does not work. And for Bill Gates and Mike Chertoff to get together in a smoke-filled room one evening and come up with STEM OPT, and then to have President Obama extend that for 3 years, that if there's ever a case for Chevron deference, that's it. Because that whole program was dreamt up by Department of Homeland Security, and it needs to go away.
Howdy, everyone, and welcome back to Moment of Truth, the podcast of American Moment. My name is Saurabh Sharma. I'm the president of American Moment, and this week it's just me. Nick is like way overdue for having his baby. Hopefully he's had it by now. So he's home with his lovely wife, Evie, and we wish him the best of luck welcoming a bouncing baby boy into the world. This week I sat down with a very, very good friend of American Moment, someone who teaches for us all the time. He's basically our guru on the legal immigration regime here in the United States. I taped with Kevin Lynn. But before I get to that, be sure to go to AmericanMoment.org. There you can find everything we have cooking as an organization. You can sign up for the fall session of AM Fridays. We have fall fellows about to arrive here in Washington, D.C. If you'd like to reach out to us, go to AmericanMoment.org/join in order to become part of what we're doing here. Talk to us about getting involved here in Washington, either in Congress or potentially in the next administration. If you'd like to hire our people, be sure to reach out as well. You can shoot me an email at Saurabh@AmericanMoment.org. But today we had Kevin Lynn. He's the executive director of the Institute for Sound Public Policy, an organization that pushes back against neoliberal and globalist policies through the movement of people, capital, and goods have injured American workers, our national security, and prospects for future generations. Over a multifaceted career, Kevin was commissioned a second lieutenant following graduation from Kemper Military College and ended military service in the rank of captain. He was a senior manager at Ernst & Young and worked as a director with Ryan Inc. in tax in Texas as well. He is just an extraordinarily brilliant mind, one of the great effective activists here in Washington, D.C. We talked about what's our legal immigration regime all about. Talk to us about H-1B, OPT, L1O, all of these employment visas, how they're being abused and how it injures the wealth and prosperity of everyday American citizens. We talk a lot about illegal immigration in the movement and on the show, but it's also important to pay attention to how our legal immigration system is being abused. There's a really fun story about how they got President Trump's attention in 2020 when it came to saving 200 union jobs at the Tennessee Valley Authority. Highly recommend you stick around through that. If you want to listen to our special members only segment, you can become a truther or a statesman on YouTube. There you can get the members only segment. If you subscribe, and that also gets you the episodes 24 hours early. We'll go now to Kevin Lynn. Kevin, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Saurabh, this is a great pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Feels like this is way overdue. You've been so essential to helping us think about the immigration issue for so long. You teach for us all the time. I'm very excited for the guests to get to hear about you today. But first, start with your background. You probably have one of the most interesting ideological backgrounds of anyone we've had on this show so far. Tell us a story. How'd you end up doing what you do today?
Yeah, a lot of plasticity there.
Yeah.
But really, at the end of the day, from a principle standpoint, I don't feel I've changed at all. Mm. A little bit about me. I grew up on a small farm in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. My father was a flight engineer for Transworld Airlines. My mother grew up on a dairy farm in Ireland. 2 days after high school, I went in the Army, which is something I had always wanted to do. And I stayed there for 11 years. I left in the rank of captain. I was initially commissioned into the infantry. I went to a small military college. I was commissioned into the infantry. And then a couple years after that, I was branch transferred to Intelligence Corps. And then I found myself working in what we call echelon above corps level units in Northeast Asia and in Europe. And I was, in fact, one of my additional duties when in Europe, I was the Supreme Allied Commander, Europe's terrorism analyst.
Wow.
At that time, the whole global terrorism thing was dying down. And it was reinvigorated, of course, after 9/11, but I was one of the last people with the last of the records and everything, but we were hunting people like Abu Nidal, Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine General Command, So for someone in their 20s with a gun, a badge, and a credential, it was a great way of life.
Yeah.
But left that and did a couple entrepreneurial things, ended up working for one of the large accounting firms. But prior to that, in 1992, there was a guy who was being interviewed on CNN, Ross Perot, and his message really resonated with me. He was Ross Perot is a Texas billionaire. For those people who may not be familiar, he did an independent run for president in 1992. He took about 17% of the total vote at that time, and he was very much against a lot of these trade deals, such as the North American Free Trade Agreement, the Uruguay round of the General Agreement on Tax and Tariffs, and the World Trade Organization. All those things after I'd been a volunteer for him, by the end of the campaign, I'd built the second largest group for him in Arizona, and they hired me on after the election. I worked for his United We Stand America group. In fact, I still carry the United We Stand America pin on my lapel.
What was that? Was that the C3 or C4 he spun up after?
It was the C4, correct, yeah. Yes. And the whole idea was what we really want to do, much like what we see a lot of really great groups on the, that are right of center now, getting involved and educating people on what's going on in terms of policies, whether they be domestic or international, but also civic engagement, getting people involved. And in my current organization, that's one of the legs on the stool is civic engagement. I've never forgotten the importance of that. But I ended up working after I worked for Perot for a couple of years. I worked in the accounting world. I worked for Ernst & Young. I made senior manager there. And then I worked for a few other firms, Ryan, which was the last firm that I worked for. And then after that, I started to do what I do now. And that was 2016. But in 2007 is when I was one of the founding board members of this group. And it started with a conversation with former Governor Dick Lamb of Colorado, who was the longest serving governor in Colorado's history. He was a Democrat, but equally loved and hated by Democrats and Republicans alike. He was a very prudent leader of the state. For instance, when he saw that the Olympics weren't going to pencil out, he canceled them. And what he wanted to do was have a conversation, because at that time, I was a Democrat. And he wanted, but I made my views known on immigration. As I'd mentioned, my mother was an immigrant. She came here in 1952 into a system that was restrictive and very well regulated. And it was a good time for immigrants, and it was a good time for the native born, because the system was made to work that way. Mm-hmm. No one was being exploited one way or the other. So we formed an organization that would reach out to the left. We hired an executive director. And in 2016, I moved back to the East Coast. Our executive director wanted to move on. And I thought, I'll take it over for about a year. I'll hire another executive director and move on. But it was 2016. President Trump was elected to office. Immigration was front and center. I found that there were a couple areas, and one in particular that really wasn't getting a lot of traction in the movement. Everyone was talking about illegal immigration and the numbers of legal immigration, but no one was focusing on these employment visas, Saurabh. And we're talking like the H-1B visa. We'll talk more about this, I'm sure. The L-1, the L-2, optional practical training, H-4 EAD. No one was talking about the impact they were having on, interesting enough, not when you look at the H-2A, which is the agriculture, the H-2B, the seasonal workers, people on the lower end of the economic spectrum. No one was talking about the impact these employment visas were having on our professional classes. And we kind of, we did a launch. We created a group called U.S. Tech Workers, which has been wildly popular. We did a few stunts, which we'll probably talk about this. Initially, we did an ad campaign on the Bay Area Rapid Transit that one reporter on a left-wing journal said to me when they finally got a hold of me, said, it's like rubbing steel wool in an open wound, what you did to this city.
Tell me about these ads. What exactly were they?
Okay. So like I said, we had to address this issue of employment visas, in particular the H-1B. And I wanted to make a splash. And what we did was we put ads, posters that said, U.S. tech workers, your companies think you are expensive, expendable, and a couple other things in there. Ask Congress to pass H-1B reform. And so we put that on 200 trains, and we literally covered 2 stations. Like the one station was where, in San Francisco, where Salesforce.com is and several other big tech companies. And that morning when it came out, it was funny. It was supposed to start on a Monday. And then Thursday night, I'm having dinner with some people, and I get a call from the fellow who had set this all up, the marketing company. He goes, Kev, I got great news for you. We're going to launch tomorrow, which was Friday. I'm like, we don't even have the website ready.
Yeah.
So 3 a.m, we had the website ready to go. And it hit, and we probably got about $2 million in earned media out of that. Everyone was talking about it. And it was initially really negative because, like BuzzFeed, like I mentioned, the reporter that got a hold of me, he's like, look what you're doing. You're making everyone afraid here in San Francisco. And then I forget his name, but a reporter for the San Jose Mercury News did a article on it. And it was a really good article. He's like, I understand where these guys are coming from. This is what's been going on. I'm glad someone's finally saying it. And after that, everything changed to a very positive response from the media. And I was on a couple local television shows, and it was so funny because the reporter, before we launched into the interview, she goes, I just want you to know I'm with you. And when they actually did ran it, something was put in there about me. It's amazing, Saurabh. I've gone from being on the executive board of the California Democratic Party to having a page dedicated to me on the Southern Poverty Law Center. So she goes, in there they said, oh, and Kevin Lynn is on the Southern Poverty Law Center anti-immigrant list. And the reporter goes, but I talked to him about that, and he explained what's going on. And I talked to her after. He said, yeah, my editor made me put that in there. I said, but if that's going to go in there, I need to do a reclama, and I need to say what Kevin would say what Kevin said in his defense on something like that. Mm-hmm. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
We definitely had a lot of the press with us at that point. And, so that was our big splash into U.S. tech workers. And I got to tell you, Saurabh, I knew almost nothing about the program when we did it. I knew we had to do it. Did I understand all the nuances and the details of it? No, I didn't. But I learned really quick because so many great people got attracted to us after that. Roger Ross joined us as a result. Two of our board members joined us as a result of that. And so the expertise started flowing in. And of course, the second big thing, which we're probably best known for, is we met with President Trump on August 3rd, 2020. And with that meeting, we had saved 200 Tennessee Valley union IT jobs from being outsourced and eventually offshored. And if you want, I'll give you the little history
Please.
On that. Okay. So it's August 2020. Now, I will say, up until this point, I had been critical of President Trump's work on the employment visa side. He was doing great work on illegal immigration. Remain in Mexico was absolutely genius. It was a brilliant move. And some people that are actually very closely associated with American Moment were involved in that. And it was a brilliant move that was able to circumvent the Flores ruling. So we were able to keep these people in Mexico while we were adjudicating their asylum claims and other claims to come here. And eventually it had the impact of deterring people altogether. They just stopped coming. I mean, shelters that were full were empty in the course of 3 months. So illegal immigration is going good. COVID is raging. You know, I'm one of the unjabbed, but that was a hot topic, and the Trump administration was able to implement Title 42, which isn't an immigration statute, but it is a health and wellness statute. Mm-hmm. So using the health emergency, we're able to actually keep more people from entering the country, and those that did, remove them quickly. Now, so in this environment, one day I got a call from Jeff Sessions. And I said, well, Kev, I hear you know all about these H-1B visas. I'm like, well, a little bit, sir. And he goes, would you want to come down and speak at a rally here in Huntsville, Alabama? I'm like, sure. And that was the first time I got to meet the workers at the Tennessee Valley Authority. And I gave a speech, and several other people did. And driving back up
what were those TVA employees doing in Huntsville?
Well, the Tennessee Valley Authority, it says Tennessee, but really there's several states that authority encompasses. So it's Alabama, Tennessee, parts of northern Georgia, and it's a quasi-public-private organization. So it's not a private energy corp. It's not a public one. It's quasi. And interestingly enough, the president of the United States appoints the board, the chairman, as well as the board of directors. Mm-hmm. So, and it was created during the 1930s, during the midst of the Depression, to electrify the South and bring modern economic development there. So I went down, spoke, and driving back up, because I had been through this so many times over the prior 2-3 years, Saurabh, where these outsourcing campaigns begin. They tell the workers, they bring them in and say, look, you're going to train, if you want your severance pay, you're going to have to train your replacement, because it's illegal to, take a foreign worker and replace an American worker with them. However, if the company outsources an operation like their IT department or their accounting department or their marketing department, they can do that. And the term is H-1B visa dependent companies. And there are a number of them, like my old alma mater, Ernst & Young. They have groups that outsource work with using H-1B workers. Deloitte and Touche. Also, there's Indian companies, Tata Consultancy Services, Infosys, several others. I refer to them all as body shops at this point, because what they're able to do is bring in foreign workers on the H-1B visa to fill their ranks. They outsource these operations with someone who's making anywhere from 30 to 40% less. And where they're able to, and that we call that wage arbitrage, and that's where they make their profit off of, displacing an American who companies, as I mentioned in our ad, consider to be expensive and expendable, and they replace them with a foreign worker, essentially. And of course, those jobs don't just stay here in the United States. Once that tech transfer is done, that you initially have the transfer between the American worker to the H-1B worker, and then the H-1B worker to someone who is offshore at a low-rent country. And that's the big tragedy. So once these jobs go, they're gone. So that's what was going on at Tennessee Valley Authority. They were going to outsource these jobs to H-1B visa consulting firms. And as I'd mentioned, I'd been through this so many times and failed so many times to stop it. One, a lot of these workers are kind of atomized, the way they work and socialize. So coming together and pushing back, like saying, like at Disney, is a great example where the workers were called in one day. Like one woman, she told me she thought she was getting promoted, and she was told she was going to get fired. And they told them, look, if you want your severance pay, the next 6 months, you're going to have to train your replacement. And they're all here on H-1B visas. And that's eventually what happened. But no one thought to say, hey, look, as a group, none of us are coming into work tomorrow. That should have been the solution. It should have been a collective solution to say, up yours, you go run your data now, because we're not going to do it. Unfortunately, we could never get that. There were individual opportunities to do lawsuits and things like that, but rare and far between. But in the case of the Tennessee Valley Authority, they had a union. Now, the union had pretty much rolled over at this point because they said, well, we're federal employees and we really can't strike, and we've exhausted every other opportunity. And driving back up to the Shenandoah Valley, I thought to myself, there's only one person who's going to save these jobs, and that's Donald J. Trump. But we didn't have access to President Trump. And so how do you get it? Well, we did an ad, and the ad was a short little 30-second ad that I knew would, if President Trump saw it, was going to piss him off. And the ad itself didn't cost a lot to make. A lot of it was done in-house, but the distribution, that cost me about $100,000. And I had to go hat in hand to a lot of our sources of revenue and, beg them. And they're like, you're going to risk $100,000 on an ad? I'm like, yeah, it just felt right. And it worked.
Where'd you run the ad?
We ran it throughout the region of the Tennessee Valley Authority, and then here in Washington, D.C., on channels like Fox News, on shows that we knew President Trump watched. And I was having dinner with one of my attorneys in Alexandria, and my phone, all these texts are blaring in. And I'm like, what? And then finally, Roger Ross, who works with us, gets a hold and says, oh my God, Trump just tweeted you. He called you fake news. And I'm like, what? I'm looking at the ad, and it was exactly the response I thought we would get, because it starts out, President Trump in his tweet about it goes, everyone knows I hate Lyash, and Lyash is the CEO of Tennessee Valley Authority. And who are these U.S. tech workers? This is fake news. Because the ad itself, it starts off with, where does the highest paid federal employee live? And it goes, here in D.C.? No, he lives here in Knoxville, Tennessee. It's Jeff Lyash. Last year, he made a total of $8 million in total compensation, which, and the rest was history. I got a call from Theo Wald, who was Deputy Director of Domestic Policy. And he said, look, can you bring some workers up to the White House? And we did. And later I found, I thought I was the one taking all the risks on this, Saurabh. But I found out that, Theo and a few others were taking a huge risk too, because they were bringing in someone, myself, and several union workers into the cabinet room. No one knew how things were going to go. It was a big risk. And had they gone badly that day, who knows what would have happened to those guys. But it went amazingly well. And I knew it was going well because in one of the side seats, Kelly McEnany had a smile. She was grinning from ear to ear. It went so well. President Trump fired the chairman of the board of directors at TVA and one of the board members. And you'll love this. Partway through, Mark Meadows comes into the room with a note. And the note is, he'd just gotten off the phone with the CEO of Tennessee Valley Authority, who said, oh, we're going to rescind that decision to outsource all those jobs. And so those 200 union workers, Saurabh, are still employed today directly because of what President Trump did.
Wow.
I mean, that's our probably the greatest thing we've done to date with our group.
It's amazing. And all that for just $100,000. It's one of the reasons why I find the way you operate in politics so interesting is you find these asymmetric opportunities to do something big with relatively little in terms of resources.
And I think I love that term asymmetric because that's exactly what it is. When I came to DC, when I was in the military, the whole decade of the 80s, I was intelligence and I worked for the Intelligence and Security Command, and my hobby was terrorism and asymmetric warfare. No one was really doing that because at that time, the Cold War was institutional. It was, them, big organizations, big tables of organization and equipment against other big TONEs and, global conflict. I was really involved in, the small, as you said, asymmetric guerrilla warfare, insurgency, counterinsurgency. So coming to DC, I look at organizations in our movement and other movements, and I could tell they didn't get it. And what they didn't get is like, well, we have the office, we got the nice chairs, the Naga hide, we're here in DC. It's like, no. We never really keep an office here in DC, but we're all over the country. We're not part of the Potomac crowd. And think of us as like some U-boat prowling around out there. And we see a target of opportunity, all the resources go into it. And that's how we fight this, because we're hard to draw a beat on, because again, what do you do after you do your thing? You kind of fade back into the woodwork, and then you go about prowling again for that next target of opportunity. And that's something we got very good at. And I think, again, a lot of that draws on my experience in working insurgency, counterinsurgency operations.
That's fascinating. Let's talk about these visa programs specifically, because I think that thematically, a lot of conservatives are ready to say, yeah, these programs are a problem, but they don't precisely know why. What is the H-1B visa program? Why was it started? And how has it gotten corrupted over time?
Great. And that's, I think, a great way to frame my response. The H-1B visa program started with the Immigration Reform Act of 1990, and that was signed into law by George H.W. Bush. And it was predicated on this notion that a guy named Block, he was director of the National Science Foundation. He had come up with a paper that had not been peer-reviewed or published. And it said, we're going to have a shortage of 600,000 STEM workers in the country. And STEM is science, technology, engineering, and math. It was a false premise, because in a market economy, labor shortages don't exist, because if there's a high demand for a skill, people are going to learn that skill and be employed in it because they'll make a lot more money. And that's exactly what happened in America. People learned to code. They were majoring in computer science, other engineering and math, and they were learning this. And I mean, we built Silicon Valley. But the act, it was really quite nefarious in a lot of ways. It was predicated on a quote unquote bogus labor shortage, but really, and I have a friend, he's retired, he's 84, he worked at Lawrence Livermore his whole career. And when I was telling him this, he goes, Kevin, they've been trying to reduce our wages of scientists since the 60s. And that was the problem. Wages were rising. They didn't have a lot of control over this workforce because it was all between their ears. And it wasn't uncommon if you were a tech worker here in the US in the 80s and into the 90s and early 2000s, you might work for a couple years and then take off for a couple months and then come back, find another contract and work that way. And, people, they went with their skills and they're readily employable because the demand was there. Well, the Immigration Reform Act of 1990 was designed to end that, because specifically when it created the H-1B visa, it created what I'd mentioned earlier, that knowing that how this would be used, it would be used to outsource and offshore these IT jobs. And then 2, they turned the visa into a dual intent visa. So this wasn't simply a temporary foreign worker program. This was something where you could work here for 3 years on an H-1B, get extended for another 3 years. And if the company that you were working for wanted to sponsor you for a green card, they could. And so that's where two things, it created this bizarre dynamic where, one, the companies loved it because they're bringing in people from country. Now, over 70%, closer to 74% of all H-1B holders come from one country, India. People are desperate to get out of India, and this is a way to do it. And the program, the labor condition application that's filled out, that a company puts out there saying, here we have this, they're highly subscribed to from people from India. And the nature of the visa is, as I mentioned, it's not just a temporary employment visa. It's a dual intent. So if the company decides to sponsor you, you're on a pathway to a green card. Now, because of the Immigration Reform Act in 1965, like when my mother came here in 1952, the vast majority of people coming here on a green card, because we didn't have employment visas at the time, were coming from Europe, and specifically Northern Europe. Now, 1965, they wanted to change that and increase the diversity. Then, because they felt it would be more fair. So they put on a quota of only so many, like you couldn't exceed 7% of any one country in any given year. Now, because 74% of the people on H-1B come from one country, India, when they start to be given or put in the application process for a green card, it created this logjam. Whereas for most countries, Ireland, your wait for a green card might be 6 months or a year because of this cap, because, it's not highly subscribed to. Green cards aren't highly subscribed to us from, let's say, Ireland or Germany. But India, where it's highly subscribed to, we're looking at maybe 10 years to get a green card. Now, the benefit to that company is this. So they got someone here for 3 years, and then an extension 3 years, and then maybe 10 years. That's essentially an indentured servant. That's why they love it. These people aren't going anywhere because they're beholden to that company for their green card. And that relationship could be severed at any time by the company. Mm-hmm. And that's why it's such an awful program in that respect. It has the impact of keeping, a very compliant workforce with them for a long period of time. And also think about it. Prior to the early 2000s, as it was explained to me by a professor at University of California, Irvine, we were talking about tech transfer. And he said, oh my gosh, let me tell you what tech transfer is. Someone working at company A takes everything between their ears to company B, and that's tech transfer. Well, if you got this new crop of workers, sans Americans and people who are lawful permanent residents, or what we like to call the rest of the world, most of the people from on H-1Bs working for you, they're not going to go anywhere, Saurabh. They're not going to come up and create that better mousetrap. So it's really a monopsony situation, for lack of a better word at this point.
Yeah. How has the program changed and how it's been used over time? Are these companies starting to test the edges of the outside of the law? Talk to me about that timescale.
Sure. As I mentioned, a company, well, I may not have said this specifically. A company doesn't have to, when they fill out a labor condition application for a job, they don't have to demonstrate that they cannot find an American for that job. That's another benefit of the Immigration Reform Act in 92. Yeah. Whereas if you're an ag worker, the company needs to demonstrate they tried to hire an American, but not for an H-1B.
Although there's funniness with the ag stuff too, right? Because it's like you just have to put it in the newspaper. Who reads the newspaper?
Yeah. Exactly. Now, the glitch with the H-1B is, so if I'm working at, let's say, eBay, and I'm an H-1B worker, and the company sponsors me for a green card, that position I'm in, at that point needs to be advertised to see if there isn't an American or lawful permanent resident that can't fill that position.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where the hijinks and hilarity come in. There are law firms like Erickson Immigration Group, Fragaman. They make hundreds of millions of dollars a year in guiding companies on how to avoid having these ads found by Americans. And you mentioned like a newspaper. Okay, who advertise? If you're Facebook, Facebook, that's a good example because they were caught on this. Why would you advertise a position that is, one, difficult to find, and then when you apply for it, you had to send your resume in snail mail to them? I mean, there's no website to fill out. And so this is it's all part of that, what they call the perm process when you're going permanent. But Facebook and Apple have been found guilty of playing fast and loose with the perm process. And they've been fined by Department of Justice. And I have to tell you, right now, we're engaged in a pretty significant lawsuit. And it includes 40 companies. And these companies, they're part of a job board called P33 Chicago H1B Connect. And essentially, all the advertising, even when members of these companies were advertised, or not advertised, but being interviewed by the media, they said, oh yeah, all these H1Bs are getting fired on the coast and we want to bring them here to Illinois. Well, that's discrimination. Mm-hmm. I mean, when I was talking to an agent at the Department of Justice, they were like, Kev, these are hard to prove. And I said, excuse me? What if the site had said P33 Chicago White Connect? Now, if you're any color but white, I think my chances of getting a job on this site, not so good. So we had 9 of our awesome activists who are tech workers apply for jobs they were all qualified to hold. None of them got job offers. Mm-hmm. A couple had interviews. I think the longest string of interviews, there were 2 interviews for that position. And then one of them was shot down like immediately, finished filling out the application online, gets an email saying, no, you're not what we're looking for. Well, we took that same resume, filled out the application again with another name, Pritesh Patel, and we didn't list their citizenship. And he gets a call back for an interview.
Wow.
So we're engaged in this lawsuit now. Department of Justice chose not to go forward with this. They gave us a right to sue. And I think the reason they chose not to go forward was largely political, Saurabh. Mm-hmm. I mean, one of the co-founders of P33, the parent organization of this job board, is Penny Pritzker. Mm. Her brother is the governor of the state of Illinois. She was Secretary of Commerce under Obama.
Yeah.
And you got to wonder, wait a minute, this is, as they say, plain as a nose on my face, what's going on here. And we've had a lot of these things. There was a wonderful tech worker activist, Bob Heath, and he would look for these advertisements that would discriminate, and he would file complaints with Department of Justice. And he won on 3 of them.
Wow. So
it's not like this is unprecedented.
Are these penalties meaningful, or are these just...
They're kind of road bumps. Mm-hmm. I mean, at the end of the day, what was it with Facebook? $15 million?
Yeah, mosquito bite.
Yeah, exactly. Not even a road bump. Exactly. So they're not significant. I think we've injected something a little novel into the Chicago H1B Connect in that we're calling it conspiracy. So we've actually gotten 2 that have already settled with us, 2 more that are about to settle. I'm reviewing one of their letters now, and a couple others that are going through a process of, I wouldn't call it arbitration, but it's something offered by Department of Justice where, and the problem with this is it's 40 different lawsuits under 4 different judges. Mm-hmm. And we've followed motions to consolidate under one judge and go for summary judgment. Mm-hmm. And I think we're going to get it. And I think it's going to be huge. But back to the hijinks and hilarity that are allowing companies to circumvent the perm process and keep Americans from finding jobs. Because right now, if you go to layoffs.org or com, it's a site that tracks all of these layoffs of the tech companies, the FANGs and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Over 250,000 people have been laid off in the last year. How is it that these companies are still advertising positions? And we know they are because we have found where they're advertising them. We have been able to see that when we mail in a resume, the ad gets taken down. They wait the requisite 60 days, and then they put the ad back up. And then we get letters saying, no, we don't, the activists. So we have right now 4 complaints. One of our activists has 4 complaints going with Department of Justice. And it's looking really good on all 4 of them because you have them dead to right. And what we're finding too, to make it even more sinister what's going on, as I'd mentioned, there are law firms that are not just, one of them is not just guiding these companies through it. They're actually acting as their HR department. And and in this case, for every advertisement you might see for a position, they're keying that to thousands of jobs. So you might see an application, but they're actually saying, oh yeah, we advertise a job, but it's one of 1,000 jobs that they have that they advertise in that one place for that one job. So we're looking at doing something that will be much bigger than Chicago P33 on that. It's so large. And when you look at the client lists of these law firms, and they're all involved in it, and now that we've cracked the code on it, we're planning something pretty significant.
Pick another visa program that particularly grinds your gears and tell me about it.
Yeah. It has to be optional practical training.
OPT.
OPT. And there's STEM OPT, there's CPT, curriculum practical training, regular OPT. Now, we used that year 2019 to really look into just how many of these employment visa workers are here on, for professional jobs. Mm-hmm. So you have H-1B, we have over 500,000. You have L1, which is, it's a way, if you're working in Microsoft in Indonesia, they can move you to the United States on what they call an L1, intercompany transfer. Mm-hmm. And there's very little red tape to that. Mm-hmm. Few 100,000 people there on that program. And then you look at between STEM OPT and OPT, there are more people in those programs than there are in the H-1B program here in the U.S. working. What OPT is, it is if you're a foreign student here on an F1 visa, after you graduate, if you graduate with a STEM degree, you can get a 3-year employment authorization document, an EAD, and you can work for anyone, anywhere. And because it's practical training, the company that you're working for, they can pay you anything they want. So imagine, and another thing is, the company doesn't have to pay your FICA Social Security taxes.
Wow.
I mean, it's a great haircut for them. So imagine you've just graduated from college with a degree in computer science, and you're an American citizen, and you're competing with someone who graduated from the same college, who's on OPT. Who's the company going to take? And they get the other benefit. We talked about this indentured servitude. So if you were to work for that company on an OPT, there's no guarantee of a pathway to citizenship, but they can also sponsor you for an H-1B. And then eventually down the road, sponsor you for a green card. I mean, this is a disaster. So the H-1B program basically pushes Americans out of jobs who've been in those careers. And these are, are they the very best and brightest coders? No, these are your kind of bread and butter IT sector workers. And then for those coming in to the job sector, they're getting pushed out by OPT. And at the end of the day, I loved Bhatia Sargon said something wonderful after the event with President Trump and Elon Musk. And she says, I don't care if these are good people coming here. It's the numbers that matter. Mm-hmm. And the numbers are what's depressing wages for working Americans. And she just finished her book where she's interviewed dozens and dozens of people whose backs are really against the wall in this economy. And it used to be, you'd think, just people who are wage earners. And when I say, because I look at pulling back just a little bit from immigration, when we look at the labor side, at people in America, John Michael Greer, who's an author and a lot of other things, wrote a book, and he talked about there being 4 types of people in terms of, because you always say, well, where do you get your money? And so you have what he calls the coupon clippers. So these are the people that get their money from investments and stocks, or, then you get your people, or retirement. And then you get your people that are professionals, salary with benefits. And then you get your people who are on some form of government subsistence or government pension or something like that. And then you have your wage earners. And these are the people that are working for an hourly wage with typically no benefits. And that's a class of worker that's facing extinction. Their backs are absolutely against the wall. So they're the ones being but it's also the professional salary. Because we used to think, again, it was just these wage earners that are being impacted by immigration. But the professional salaried people are being impacted too, because, we talked about the IT jobs that were saved at the Tennessee Valley Authority. What a lot of people don't know is they're planning to do the same thing to the accounting department. They were going to outsource that to H-1B visa dependent companies, and all kinds. We saw when Nehru took over PepsiCo, all of a sudden they started outsourcing all the back office operations. So these professional salaried people, their jobs and livelihoods are very much on the chopping block.
How do you think AI is going to play into all of this? It seems like with the advent of these LLMs that the industries with the biggest exposure are going to be these sort of white collar, data heavy industries, rather than truck drivers, at least at this stage. How do you see this all playing into the dynamic that's existed over the last 10, 15, 20 years?
I think it's going to be significant. I was at a convention and I saw there was a briefing on AI, and I went up to the speaker afterward and I said, look, I want to hate you, but I can't. He's like, yeah, you got to get in on this. It's going to impact medical significantly. It's going to impact IT. Anything where there's any kind of repetitive, duplicative effort. And that's a lot of professional white collar jobs. And the AI will begin to assess and suss things out. I could see full blown audits, accounting audits being done by AI. If everything is sitting in QuickBooks or some other cloud-based service, there's all kinds of ways to detect fraud, waste, and abuse and pull up red flags. And AI can do that because those things can be programmed into it. So in that respect, I think a lot of white collar jobs can be supplanted by AI. Do we need 3 people in marketing? We could buy with just 1 or 2, and AI, with the AI tools that are out there. I think that's kind of where we'll see it. I don't fear AI in the sense that it's going to become sentient and, displace the way we think and everything and stuff and tell us what to think. People are doing that. But that's where I see that as additional, but not nearly as significant, because let's just say if we didn't have the immigration factoring into this and that marketing department I was describing, you can get by with 2 people and not 3. Well, that increased productivity of those two people generates more profit. And those profits will fund things like pension plans and stuff like that. So it actually makes America, that business, more competitive. The problem is what we've been doing with AI, well, not AI, but immigration, is those jobs, we've been supplanting them with foreigners and then eventually offshoring those jobs that will never come back. That's serious economic loss in my view.
What do you make of this idea? You know, the popular presentation of these high-skilled visa programs is that we're letting in the Einsteins. And I think that there is a sort of latent common sense mentality among a super majority of Americans that, man, if these are really Einsteins, yeah, let them in. But that's obviously not the case given the scale of it. How do you think about like what the most idealized version of a truly high-skilled immigration program would actually look like?
Well, we have one. It's called the O visa. It's for people of exceptional merit, talent, and accomplishment. And it's undersubscribed to because in the world, there's only so many geniuses. I was involved in a startup technology company called Predixis. And the chairman and the guy who developed the technology, it was an algorithm that could literally map the palate to food and map your likes to music and everything, which is why we call the company Predixis. And the guy was a genius. And he had gotten his PhD in physics from Caltech. He had the company that he had started was called Parasoft. He thought the world was going to go parallel computing. But he always said, look, you have to understand, there are truly exceptional people that produce 80% of the value out there. And we have the programs. And where we've seen people that, let's say they graduate from college here, they're really smart, they're doing things, and let's say communications. Well, when you really get down to it, the reason they don't stay in the U.S. is they couldn't get funding for their companies. And even if, let's say, they don't come here on an O visa, we have visa programs that will allow them to start companies here. And where people of exceptional merit and talent haven't been able to remain here in the U.S., it's not about how we manage our immigration policy. It's their personal preference and where they could get funding.
Yeah. That's so interesting. Like we have the O visa, and like that's not, anytime one of these tech bros says, well, we should let in the geniuses, it's like, okay, we've got the O visa.
One other thing that I think it's important to note there. So we have the O visa. Now the H-1B visa, again, which people are saying it's high skilled. The reality is these are skilled, ordinary workers.
Yeah. Making a median salary of what?
Making a median salary. And the thing is,
but what's their median salary that they?
Well, they are supposed to be paid a prevailing wage, but the reality is, depending on the location, because it'll be different in San Francisco than it will in Columbus, Ohio. Right. But what we have found, our research has shown us, is they're earning anywhere from 20 to 30% less than their equivalent rest of the world counterpart.
But as an aggregate, all the H-1Bs in America, they're making a median salary of what, 80, 90, 70K?
I think it's, if I recall, it's 89,000.
Okay. So these are it's not, geniuses don't make 89,000,
Geniuses are making, 330 less.
Yeah.
Right. But the thing is, you would think though, even with all that said, you would think that when we bring someone here on H-1B, somehow there's some rigor applied to their application where, okay, of that 85,000 that we brought in the lottery, this guy was the top one but no, it's purely a lottery. The 85,000 people, and there's another 20,000 that, nonprofits and government can sponsor in. But it's a lottery. It doesn't matter where they went to school, what their experience is, what they require, what their grades were, what they've, do they have any patents? Have they, it just doesn't matter. We're just shooting ducks in a barrel. And last year, there were over 700,000 applications for the H-1B visa. And of that, they pulled 85,000 in a very random way. So that's the big problem we're having. So it's obvious they're not using the H-1B visa for high-skilled workers. They're getting their indentured servants.
It feels like we're probably due any moment now. At the end of every Congress, there's an effort to lift so-called country caps for H-1B visas. Are we due for another one of those attempts? And what is that? Why is it a bad idea?
Well, after we'd founded U.S. Tech Workers, immediately we went into the fight against, it was called at that time, H.R. 1044, Fairness for High-Skilled Immigrants Act. Again, as you said, it's one of those attempts to lower the country caps so we can, clear the green card logjam of people here from one country, India. And it's like the locusts. They keep coming back every 2 years, and every 2 years we have to beat it back down. I wish we didn't have to. We expend a lot of time and effort to do it, but we've been successful every year. And if it rears its head again at the end of this Congress, as it did the last one, we'll have to beat it back. Now, interestingly enough, in the last Congress, 2 Congresses ago, was S386, the Fairness for High School Immigrants, was Senate bill, and it was sponsored by Mike Lee. And he received such a drubbing being the sponsor. I'm sure he was told, oh, this will pass, no problem. But he received such a drubbing. He's gotten very, very good on employment visa issues.
That's great.
Yeah. So that kind of gets back into the politics where it's so important what you do, what we do, because I believe a politician is always going to lie to us. I mean, they just do. I'll give you a great example. There was a guy in Arizona. His name was Coppersmith. He entered office in 92. He was a Democrat that we actually, the Perrois, helped get into office because he was against NAFTA. And on the eve of the NAFTA vote, we were hearing weird things that were coming out of his office that he was maybe going to vote for NAFTA. So the Friday before the vote, we went in to see him. And it was funny. The sun was setting in the window, and there's 4 of us in talking to him. And I go, Sam, I'm hearing you're going to vote for NAFTA. Is that true? And he's like, well, Kev, you look at, I go, excuse me, you didn't read this document. None of your staff read the document, but we have. There's 12 people here in Maricopa County. We all took sections of it. We all read it. This is bad. You said you weren't going to do it. He's like, Kev, I go, you're toast. He goes, I can't believe you're going to hang me out to dry on this one issue. And this one guy, Ben, pulls out a tablet. He goes, actually, we didn't like your vote on Samoa. We know this vote was brokered. And this guy just slumped in his chair. And he knew he would never hold that seat, and he didn't run for the seat the next time.
Wow. And
that's how we do it, Saurabh. There's an amazing book. And it's actually, I was watching a podcast years ago by Chris Hedges, who was being interviewed. And he talked about a book called The Fall of the Public Man by Sennett. And I love this book because he talks about, get away from voting for people you like, people that you think are moral and, basically you find them to be a great person. Vote for someone that's going to be afraid of you. So afraid that they're not going to vote against your interests and the interests of your group. And that's what citizens have to really adopt. I don't care if I like you. Did you do what we told you, what we sent you to Washington to do? And if you haven't, explain yourself.
Yeah.
I did have years ago one congressman say, look, you got to understand, we wouldn't have gotten the light rail funding. I had to do it. Kev. I had to do it. I'm like, okay, all right. At least you're being honest. But that's the value of our citizenship right there. The ability to constrain these guys and get them to do what we want them to.
What's the dreams, the wish list for the next administration? President Trump and JD Vance get in there. What do you think they should be doing in order to reform our high skill immigration system?
Well, I think it's a great team for starters. JD Vance seems to be perfectly aligned with, when I look at someone like a Ross Perot And what we were fighting against these terrible trade deals that were offshoring great manufacturing jobs. And the great thing is President Trump has a record here.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about what he did. He defanged the H-1B program doing 3 very specific things. 1, he got rid of the lottery we were talking about earlier. And he said, look, if you want an H-1B and you want first dibs, you have to pay the highest salary. And by the time they got to the bottom of that $85,000, there wouldn't have the normal IT sector jobs, as I mentioned, the bread and butter ones like quality assurance, things like that, they wouldn't be touched because those guys would have been picked off long before then. The second thing he did was he raised the prevailing wage. Because again, the business model of these companies, these H-1B visa dependent consulting firms, is to make a lot of profit on wage arbitrage. So you lift that prevailing wage, you make it not so much worth the hassle, particularly among those that, the Intels of the world, the Facebooks and folks like that.
Mm-hmm.
The third thing is to really tighten up on he tightened up on the specialty occupation. So, for instance, I'd mentioned quality assurance person. That's not a high skilled job, but it's a good rote IT job. Those shouldn't be included you shouldn't be able to go out in search of a foreign worker for jobs mm-hmm. like that, And right now with the H-1B program, the way it is, Saurabh, I have seen golf course groundskeepers, being applied for the H-1B. It's that loose. It's that loosey-goosey. So President Trump, the problem is when he didn't, and it was kind of funny because after that day in the White House, I was pulled aside by Scalia and Cuccinelli, and they're, I can be a little, impatient. And they're like, you got to calm down. You got to be patient. These are the 3 rule changes we have going on. I'm like, these are great. But if President Trump doesn't get a second term, what'll happen. And unfortunately, Saurabh, that's what happened. In the case of the lottery, it was sue and settle by the Department of Homeland Security. So what I mean when I say sue and settle is, a bunch of groups, universities, corporations, chambers of commerce sued Department of Homeland Security on this lottery. And the DHS folded like a cheap tent. Or other ones, there was, specialty occupations. Well, it didn't, it was, you violated the APA rules when you created the rule change. There wasn't enough time, for people to evaluate and get feedback. So that's what they do. And the executive order that created that firewall around the federal government to get rid of the H-1B visa dependent companies, it just never happened. So there are a few things that the president has done, that he can do on the employment visa side, legal side of the House. I would love to see the OPT program ended. There's an amazing human being out there, John Miano. He's a public interest attorney, and he's also a tech worker. He co-wrote a book with Michelle Malkin called Sold Out, which really goes into all the ins and outs of the H-1B visa program. And he had a long-going lawsuit. It was called WashTech versus Department of Homeland Security. And it failed here in the district court in D.C., but it went before the Supreme Court, and they chose not to hear it. So what we need is Congress to ask the Supreme Court to revisit that, because it wasn't judged on its merits. It was they just weren't decided not to hear it. Recently we received another headbutt from the district court here for the H-4EAD. That's the spouses of H-1Bs. And he basically said, well, WashTech you didn't get it with WashTech, same thing. And it's such bad law, because Congress in the Immigration Naturalization Act for the OPT for WashTech versus DHS, that program, when Congress said, here, this is what an F1 student is, they were very explicit. This person does not work. And for Bill Gates and Mike Chertoff to get together in a smoke-filled room one evening and come up with STEM OPT, and then to have President Obama extend that for 3 years, that if there's ever a case for Chevron deference, that's it. Because that whole program was dreamt up by Department of Homeland Security, and it needs to go away.
For our members only section, I'm going to ask Kevin some of the questions we always ask our guests during the members only segment. If you'd like to become a member, you can go to youtube.com, go to the American Moment channel, and you can become either a truther or a statesman. That gives you these episodes 24 hours early, as well as access to these special members only segments, as well as live events here in Washington, D.C. So, Kevin, if you're listening to this, you're almost certainly a highly sophisticated news consumer, but even the most dogged of DC politicos need a news aggregator to help them out. We're big fans of Upward News here at American Moment. Ari David has actually been a previous guest on this show. We highly recommend you check out that episode. But Upward.news is a way that our team keeps in touch with all of the crazy news stories going on around the world. Your Twitter feed is not necessarily 100% reliable to get a proper cross-section of everything going on that matters. Upward News is a fantastic young media startup that is really putting together fantastic newsletters and social media content that helps people digest the news, especially if you're tired of being on the phone with your parents and explaining news stories to them multiple times a week because you're the politico in the family. I highly recommend encouraging them to follow Upward.news. They do a free 5-minute daily email that you can sign up for at readupward.com, or even better, www.ihatefakenews.com. It's time for a palate cleanse from politicos, punch bowls, and pucks. Try Upward News today. We highly recommend it. Ari's an incredibly smart patriot, and they're a new player on the block focused on cutting through the noise and delivering smart analysis. Please check them out. Kevin, how can people keep up with everything that you're working on and doing?
The best way is to go to our website, instituteforsoundpublicpolicy.org, sign up for our newsletter. 2 weeks ago, we started playing around with Substack, and it's going really well. Like the first thing I put out got 10,000 views.
Wow.
So we're happy with the way that is going. We are on, because we're such a small staff, I wish we could do more, but we've had to kind of pick and choose our platform. So we play really hard on X. Our U.S. tech workers group punches way above its weight. We have like 23,000 subscribers there, and they're all solid. Like Roger, that's his point to surf. And we kick off any bots or people that we think are, they shouldn't be there. And we have an engagement rate. The last month has been 8.8%. And for the year, we're running 5.2% engagement rate. And that's unheard of. I mean, we're flipping all the switches there. So we've been able to influence an awful lot from there. And then, of course, there's also the IFSPP, Institute for Sound Public Policy, X page, and Project for Immigration Reform, where U.S. tech workers, we try to keep it more to the employment visa, and then P where we talk about all the other things, like when I'm out playing down on the border with Michael Yon and those guys, and Ann Vanderstill.
That's great. Well, thank you for everything that you do. Never met a champion for working people in this country quite like you. And I highly encourage everyone to follow what you're doing. It's really excellent.
Well, Saurabh, I really appreciate what you're doing. It's that old adage, out of a single walnut, the mighty oak is born. And I look at that. That's what American Moment's doing. And, it's a different town since you and Nick showed up a few years ago. So thank you.
Hopefully you enjoyed that. I certainly enjoyed taping it. It's one of those episodes that reminds you why it's so much fun to have this podcast. Be sure to follow Kevin's work at ifspp.com, and be sure to check out our work at americanmoment.org. There you can find everything we have cooking as an organization, including signing up for our fall session of AM Fridays, our lecture series on Capitol Hill. Fill out americanmoment.org/join if you'd like to get involved with what we're doing, either when it comes to hiring from our personnel pool or by joining it and getting involved here in the fight in DC. Things are interesting. They're moving fast. There's never been a better season in politics to get involved. Well, I changed my mind. The best season to get involved was yesterday. A good day is today. And tomorrow is a fine day as well. So just do it now. Don't miss out on an opportunity to save the country. And be sure to check out the backlog of the show, rate and review it 5 stars on Spotify or on Apple Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube, and be sure to tune in next week for yet another episode of Moment of Truth. It'll probably be just me again, but another fantastic guest. Thank you guys as always for listening, and we will see you next week. Moment of Truth is an American Moment podcast taped at the Conservative Partnership Campus Studios and is produced by Jake Mercier, Jared Cummings, Tiffany Kutris, and Matthew Pearson. Our intro song is A Minor Struggle by Ryan Serenich, and our website is americanmoment.org.